I realized today I've yet to make a video about the upcoming Four Nations tournament, but you know what? Let's change that. Today, we're going to be going through every single team, USA, Canada, Sweden, and Finland, and predicting the entire roster, from the forwards to the goaltenders. The rosters will be finalized in the next few weeks, but I'm sure each GM knows what they're going to likely go for, and right now I would not be surprised if some of those rosters are already set in stone. So the questions need to be asked. Who will each team end up picking? Who would I pick for each team as well? And what will the lineups ultimately look like? Well, make sure you watch till the end, because we're going to be going through every single roster in depth, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year, presented by BetUS. Speaking of which, today's video is sponsored by BetUS, the best place to play throughout the hockey season. There's going to be so many opportunities with the Four Nations coming up as well on picks for there. But as of right now, if you want to make picks on the NHL, they got every single game with all the options. You can go through Stanley Cup odds. You can also go through NCAA men's hockey odds too. So many options with BetUS. And all you got to do is use code YouTube150 when you sign up, and you'll get an 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next deposits after that. It's the best place to play. Whenever you guys sign up, it helps the channel out a ton, and thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now, how today is going to work is that we're going to go through each roster, each country, and I'm going to make my predictions for what I see the lineups looking like, and then I'm going to go into what the lineups would look like if I was in charge of the team. So basically, GM versus Grav. And we'll start with the GM side here for Team Canada, which is always, of course, a major debate, but let's start out with the forwards. Getting us started as the first line left wing will be Zach Hyman. I'm pretty confident in this, of course, with Connor McDavid being the first line centerman. I think with this tournament, teams are going to realize that there might not be a lot of time for these players to really get all that much chemistry. So chemistry heading into the tournament, I think, will be prioritized. And of course, Hyman and McDavid have a lot of chemistry together in that way. Of course, on their wing, I think it's going to end up being Nathan McKinnon. I think those two together is just too tantalizing for Canada to pass up on. And McKinnon on the wing, I think, makes a lot of sense for Canada specifically. They got a lot of top-end centermen, and in McKinnon's case, he's a lot less of a defensive player right now than some of their other options, and I think Canada goes for McKinnon on the wing ultimately. So now that we got our first line settled, let's get on to the second. Ultimately, I think Canada's going to go for a unique combination here. On the first line left wing, you're going to have Brad Marchand, centered by Sidney Crosby, and on the right wing will be Sam Reinhart. Now, I'm going to have Marchand a little bit lower in my list. I think considering Marchand, though, was one of the initial players already on Canada's roster, they have him in pretty high esteem, I would assume, and I think he's going to be in the top 6. Crosby, also a no-brainer, and Sam Reinhart especially is somebody that has just been so dominant over the last year and a half that I would be shocked if he wasn't in that top 6 in some capacity. You'll notice a theme, though, that the two left wings are going to be guys that can play in the dirty areas, get the puck back, work on the forecheck, and you'll have a center and right wing that can really duel with themselves at the offensive level, that can really produce in major ways, and I think that's something that's going to carry on to their third line. Because in the third line, I think Brandon Hagel is going to surprise a lot of folks by how high he is in the lineup, but honestly, I don't think it should be a surprise. Hagel is a brilliant player, and kind of like the same situation as Reinhart, has really elevated himself over the last couple of seasons. I think Point will be the third line center there, and on the right wing will be Mitch Marner. I think Marner maybe could get a more sheltered role than this, but I feel like Canada's going to have McKinnon, Reinhart in higher esteem, especially for some of those bigger games, those bigger moments. Marner obviously has not proven himself as a big game player yet, and I think Canada's going to rate him appropriately. Still, though, the fact that you could have somebody that does have the offensive ceiling of Marner on that third line is really important, and you also got a player like Point, and then you, of course, have the Tampa connection to Hagel and Point too, just like Hyman and McDavid. I think that's going to be important for the Canadians. Next up, going on to the fourth line and the extra forward, I think Ryan O'Reilly is going to fit himself into this lineup, considering the leadership he's had in the past, the Team Canada history. I think it's a pretty natural fit. I think Nick Suzuki will also be in the lineup. I think he's somebody that Canada holds at a very high esteem, but as a fourth line center, I think he's perfect in that position. He's so smart, so defensively driven, and I think that'll be perfect as well. And then Mark Stone, I think, has really worked himself back into this lineup. He has had a brilliant start to the season with Vegas, but considering the way he plays, how much he can play so scrappy and just get under your skin, he's going to be exactly what Canada wants on that fourth line, which is why I think Mark Scheifele will ultimately be the extra forward, somebody that if one of those top-end players gets injured, you can plug him in a more offensive role. I don't see Canada really using him in that bottom 6, especially not the fourth line, but I think as an extra forward, he works a little bit better. Ultimately, I think Canada's going to go a lot younger than people expect. I think a lot of people are expecting Bedard to be in this lineup. Unless they have a for sure top 6 spot for him, I just don't see Canada prioritizing him at 19 years old. I feel like they're going to go a lot older, and I think that's going to be the theme for a lot of these teams. Next up, we're moving on to the defense, and obviously, I think no matter what, in any situation, the top end is going to be Taves and Makar. The Colorado connection, they've been a long time paired together. There's really no reason for Canada to break them up. Outside of Taves and Makar, though, is where things get especially interesting because it's really a toss-up between so many different players that could be in these type of roles. But I think, like the forward group, we're going to see a lot of surprises, and ultimately, I think Canada's going to go a lot more defensive, and they're going to go a lot older than maybe they should. One of my hot takes is that I don't see Noah Dobson making this lineup, especially with his horrid start to this season. I don't see the Canadians prioritizing him over an older defenseman who they view as probably more defensive, more sturdy in a bottom pair role especially. But before we get into that, I wanted to get into the second line because I think it'll be Travis Sanheim who will be the big surprise for a lot of folks on this lineup. He's somebody that for Philadelphia has really branded himself a lot better in the last year as his more physical defensive player, and he's had a solid start even if Phillies has been a kind of a dumpster fire to start out this season, but I think he's one of these players that's going to be in this lineup that is going to be more in that defensive physical role that Canada is going to be prioritizing, because on that second pair you're also going to have Evan Bouchard, who will need his fair share of help when it comes to defensive play. Sanheim, I think, could actually be a pretty worthy duo for him, and I think could be a pretty good partner for him on that second pair. But like I said, I think Canada's going to go pretty wacky with this defense, and again prioritizing older defensive players, and that is why on that third pair I think this is where Darnell Nurse is going to end up. He, in terms of the online NHL space, obviously has a much worse reputation than I think GMs have for him across the league. There's a reason he got more than $9 million on a long-term deal. They view him as a top-tier defensive defenseman, and I think he's going to be on this Canadian roster. Maybe he's an extra, but I could honestly see him being on that bottom pair. I think Alex Pietrangelo makes a lot of sense as well for Canada. He's a long-time Canadian, long-time player for Team Canada. He's somebody on that bottom pair too, has had a pretty good start for Vegas this season, and due to his veteran leadership, due to how he's played recently, I don't think there's any reason for Canada specifically to have him off the roster, which I think leaves Morrissey as an extra defenseman. Again, I think Canada's going to go a lot more defensive than people will expect, which I think leaves more of an offensivity like Morrissey off the table. Maybe he's in place of Bouchard, perhaps. Maybe you switch those two, but that's how I see the defense actually looking like. And trust me, I will have this defense a lot different when we get to my actual lineup for the team, but this is how I see the Canadians going. And then going on to the goaltending, which I don't think will be much of a debate because I think they're going to end up actually surprising a little bit. I see a lot of people out there saying that Stuart Skinner is going to be in consideration here, but I just don't really see it, honestly. He's too hot and cold, I think, for a tournament like this where you're coming in a weird position on a new team and everything. I think the Canadians are going to go for a more established top three. Binnington, I think, will be the starter no matter what, but I think Darcy Kemper is going to find himself into this lineup. He's been pretty solid for LA so far, nothing spectacular, but nothing too bad, and I mean, considering how much of a veteran that Kemper is going to be, again, I think you're going to go a lot older than people will expect. Kemper, I think, fits that bill, and of course, Aiden Hill is a Stanley Cup champion recently, will also get the nod. Canadians goaltending is not going to be great, but Binnington at least can be serviceable, I think. But next up, let's go into GM Grav mode and go into the Canadian lineup that would happen if I was in charge. And first off, I'm going to go with Hagel, McDavid, and Reinhart. To me, just putting the best players possible here. In Hagel's case, I think even though you have some synergy between Hyman and McDavid, I think Hagel is just a fundamentally strong player in so many ways in terms of creating turnovers. With the forecheck he has, I think he's even more effective than Hyman in some ways with that. If he had a player like McDavid next to him, it would be absolutely over. But he's one of the best point producers over the last couple of seasons, and I think underratedly so. I think he would do damage on that first line, and considering how good of a goal scorer Reinhart has proven himself to be, even though you lose the Hyman aspect there, I think Reinhart would do just fine. On the second line, I have Connor Bedard here, mostly just because I think if you put him in a more sheltered role, I think he could absolutely thrive in it. You have Crosby as his center and McKinnon on the right wing. Those two guys can carry the puck. They can do a lot of that heavy lifting, especially in McKinnon's case. And I think Bedard would do excellent alongside those two. And on the wing, I think it would fit pretty naturally. On the third line, I have Marchand, Point, and Marner. This, to me, would be just the perfect all-around top three, where you have somebody that can play so well defensively like Points, and even Marner in some cases. And you have a player like Marchand that can do a lot of the dirty work. Marner can do this, have the soft skills, steal. Point can have those clutch goal scoring moments. A lot, I think, could come from that line. And then the fourth line I see as just the more grindy defensive style. You got Hyman, Suzuki, and Stone. This to me just brings a lot of different aspects, but I think is a pretty prototypical Canadian fourth line. And then I have Mark Scheifele as the extra. Like I talked about as the extra for the Canadian lineup, I think him as an extra for a offensive injury, I think he fits well in that position. Going on to my Canadian defense, it looks quite a bit different. The first pair, of course, is the same in Taves Makar. It would be stupid to throw those two out of the window. But then after that, it gets a lot different because I have the Vegas connection on that second pair. Theodore and Pietrangelo don't play all too often, but I think they would be very interesting on the pair and do have some natural chemistry playing on the same team there. On the third line, though, or third pair, I have Morrissey with Ekblad. And I think Morrissey being there would be absolutely huge. I think Ekblad, especially as a defensive defenseman, is in line with what Canada would usually want, but I think Ekblad is somebody that is extremely underrated defensively, and I think could get some consideration for the actual roster. And then as the extra D, I was debating between Bouchard or Weegar, but I was like, okay, if I had an injury, especially to one of my defensemen, and I had to put Evan Bouchard in there, I'm not sure how comfortable I would be there. It really depends on what you want to go with, because you could have, in place of Pietrangelo, Bouchard. I mean, he could be all over the lineup, but I just narrowly had Weegar there just because I think he could be more valuable in all situations. Again, you can never know what can happen in these type of tournaments, so having that security as the extra D, I think, is a little bit more valuable. And then as my goaltending, I have almost the exact same top three. Instead of Kemper, though, I have Logan Thompson, who I think is maybe a little bit more reliable at this spot, but still, we're splitting hairs. But now it is time for the USA predictions, and like I talked about with the Canadian one, this is how I see the team looking, not what I would do, and we'll, of course, get into the USA lineup and how I see them working out. But for the USA predictions here today, we're going to start on the first line, and I see it being the Tkachuk duo of Austin Matthews on the first, which I think is just pretty natural and pretty obvious. But the US always love to make some strange decisions, and just like Canada, they'll also, I think, prioritize older players. But on the second line, I think we're going to see Kyle Connor, Jack Eichel, and Alex Tuch. I think Alex Tuch is somebody that not a lot of people are talking about for the US lineup, but I think he brings a lot of leadership, and especially for a more grindy position on the wing, I think there's a lack of that for the US coming into this year. I think Tuch is going to end up winning a position, and on that top six, I would not be surprised to see him there. Plus, you have Eichel as the playmaker, Connor as the goal scorer, and that's just a pretty natural fit. Another one that might surprise some folks is seeing Chris Kreider in the top 9, but I absolutely see him being there with a proven track record goal scoring wise, how much he can be valuable on the power play. Him with a playmaker in Jack Hughes would be pretty awesome to see. And of course, you got Jason Robertson as another goal scorer there on the right wing. It was kind of tough trying to decide where Robertson would be on this lineup. His slow start hasn't exactly helped things either, but I think he'll still be in that top 9 no matter what. And then, of course, because the US go older, naturally reflects in that fourth and extra forward. I would love to have Cole Caulfield in this lineup, and trust me, I will. But for my actual predictions, I think it's going to be JT Miller on the fourth line left wing, Dylan Larkin centering with Patrick Kane on the right. Of course, you got the Detroit connection there in Larkin and Kane. I just don't see the US at this point not having Patrick Kane in their lineup. I just think he's too much of a force in that USA hockey program throughout so many tournaments, so many different stops, and they're going to want to have him there, especially since he is still kicking and still can work on a power play especially. I think Brock Nelson makes a lot of sense as well as an extra forward. He's somebody that can be a great goal scorer. He can have some good physical presence here and there, but he's older, of course, has been a natural centerman for a long time, and I think he's somebody that the US will want to have as a stopgap in case of injuries in the future. But he's a pretty good one. I mean, with how much of a consistent goal scorer he's been over the last few seasons, he would not be a bad extra forward. And we're just going to go through and reveal all the rest of it here for the defense especially. This is going to be very interesting, but you already got Quinn Hughes, McAvoy, and Fox locked in. Outside of that, though, again, I think we're going to see them go a little bit older than some people expect, but I see the first pairing being Quinn Hughes and Charlie McAvoy, which I think is obvious. McAvoy more of his defensive presence. Hughes as the guy that can just control pace. Slavin with Fox, same situation, but you flip the side. Slavin more as the defensive player. Fox is the guy that can work the power play. But then things are going to get interesting here, because on the third pairing, I see Noah Hannafin being here. He's somebody that has gotten a lot of success over the last couple of years, had a great run with Vegas as well. But Jacob Trouba as that third pair right D, I see Trouba being here. And I debated even a Seth Jones in this spot, but I think they're going to want to go more defensive. Trouba brings, of course, the big hits, the big physicality. He's the captain of the Rangers. I just see it happening. And with how well John Carlson has started as well with the Caps, and being an older defenseman who's played on Team USA time and time again, I see him being the extra forward ultimately. On the goaltending side, this will be the exact same in my lineups, but I have Hellebuck with Ottinger and Swayman. These are the obvious choices, and I don't really see anybody, unless there's a major injury, contending with these guys. But now we get into what I would do with the forward lineup if it were me deciding these roster decisions for the US. And the first line, I would have the same: Tkachuk, Matthews, and Tkachuk. The second line is a little bit different though, because I have Matt Boldy in this lineup. He's somebody that I mean could do a lot of work as a Swiss Army knife. He's been so good for Minnesota. I don't know if he gets the nod for this year for the actual team, but I think he should, honestly. But that duo of Connor Nichol would still be there, Boldy doing the dirty work. That would be so much fun to watch. Then on the third line, I have Jack Hughes on the wing with Larkin and Robertson. I think Hughes on the wing just makes a lot more sense. He's never been this great face-off guy, and of course isn't the best defensive player, but I think could bring some speed, some skill in that wing, and Larkin I think could be a really fun center around him. And then the fourth line, I have Kreider, Trocheck, the Rangers connection there. Trocheck has been really underrated over the last year and a half. He has really elevated his game for the Rangers. And then I got Cole Caulfield on the fourth line. Yes, he's not the best defensive player in the world, but I think with how much Kreider and Trocheck can control at least the physical aspect of the game, I think Caulfield could be pretty insulated there. And then as my extra forward, I got JT Miller. I was going between him and Tuck. Both of them could fill the same type of role, but Miller, I think, just as a presence there to push everybody in that room would be pretty nice to see. As for my defense, it looks a lot different than what the US I think will ultimately put out. I still have the same top three in Hughes, McAvoy, and Fox, but I have Jake Sanderson on the left side of Fox. He hasn't had the greatest last couple weeks, but I think defensively there's a lot of potential there for Sanderson. Yes, he's super young, but I think Sanderson, if we're going by the best players here, will be really great in that position. I think on the third pair, Slavin and Faber makes a lot of sense as well. You have somebody that is on the older side that likes Slavin, but can prove himself so well defensively. Faber as well, I think, could be in his position that way and still be able to prove himself alongside Slavin defensively too. I think as a bottom pair, both of those guys out there defensively, I would love to have out there. And then as the extra, I'm gonna have Zach Werenski, somebody that can put in some offense if you need to plug him in for a major injury. He's somebody that can work a power play though, that can do a lot of different things, and I think it's a pretty good utility man as an extra D. But now we move on to the third team here in Team Sweden and getting into the predictions, not who I want to see necessarily, but the predictions of how I see this lineup working out. Sweden was actually the one that I aligned with the most out of all of these teams in terms of what I think the lineup will look like and what I want the lineup to look like. You look at this forward group and there's a lot of different options here, especially on the wings. They're very strong there. But you look at first line, I think it's going to end up being Brott, Zibanejad, and Nylander. You have a lot of different play styles there. Brott can bring the speed though, while Nylander and Zibanejad can have that goal scoring. I think the second line will be Forsberg, Pettersson, and Kempe. Kind of a similar situation with Pettersson being more of the held back centerman, while Kempe can bring some speed. Forsberg, the unbelievable deking ability. The third line, I think we're going to see Eklund get a lot of opportunity on this team. Him as the left wing with Eriksson Ek, who is really just the perfect third line center. And then you got Lucas Raymond. That line, I'm really excited to see if it ends up happening. I would love to see that. And then the fourth line, I have William Karlsson with Mikael Backlund and Gustav Nyquist. I would like to see Leo Karlsson in this spot instead, but I think they're going to go a little bit older in this position, especially Mikael Backlund. I don't see a lot of people putting him in this spot, but I think because of his defensive nature, how much of a leader he's proven to be, I see Sweden going for him in the end. And as a perfect defensive fourth line center, Backlund, I think, fits that role. Now going on to the defense, which of course is always a strength for Sweden, and they got a lot of different options here. Before the actual rosters are released, they already confirmed that Hedman, Erik Karlsson, and Gustav Forsling will be in the lineup there, so there's a lot less options there outside of that, but I think we're going to see Hedman and Karlsson together. The second line, though, will be Forsling with Rasmus Andersson, who I think is going to be a really underrated one for this team. He has had a brilliant start to the season for Calgary, and just like Backlund, I think we're going to see him in a pretty major role. On the third pair, though, I see Dahlin with Larson, and I think those two playoff styles could work out pretty well with each other. Larson, the ultra defensive player. Dahlin can just work off the puck, can sling it all around the ice. And then I see Mattias Ekholm being the extra, though I could see a situation where instead they go Ekholm and Larson on that third pair and have Dahlin as the extra. And just like on the US roster, I see the goaltending being the same between my predictions and who I want to see out there. I think the starter will be Linus Ullmark, the backup will be Jacob Markstrom, and the backup will be Philip Gustafsson. Now going on to what I would do if I was Sweden, it doesn't look all that much different, but I have the first line being Brott, Pettersson, and Nylander. I think Brott is especially the type of player that can get Pettersson going after this slow start to a season in Vancouver. I think he will be better in this Four Nations tournament. The second line I see being Forsberg, Zibanejad, and Kempe. Kempe, especially bringing that speed for a player like Zibanejad, I think is necessary there. So we'll see if that ends up fitting, but I think that second line could be really dynamic. And then the third line, I have it the same as my predictions: Eklund, Eriksson, and Raymond. Maybe I'm just willing this line into the universe and into existence, but I need to see it happen so desperately. And then the fourth line here, I have Carlson and Carlson next to Gustav Nyquist. Now, I guess I forgot to put an extra. It would probably be a player like Backlund or somebody that can be a versatile utility player who can play more defensive or bring some goal scoring if you need him to. But the fourth line, I see Leo Carlson shaping up if I was in charge. He's just somebody that I think is just too dynamic to leave off with the playmaking he has there. And also, I think William Carlson can be a pretty natural center as a fourth liner, even though he's more offensive. He has a great face-off ability, so you're not really worrying about him there either. And Gustav Nyquist is just the perfect fourth liner for this type of team, bringing experience, bringing some good offense still, but knowing when to play at his best. Now going on to my defense, which would have looked a lot different if Erik Karlsson wasn't a confirmed player, because I don't think I would have had him in the lineup. I have him at the lowest point as an extra D, but for my first pair, I have Forsling and Anderson. This to me is the best pair that Sweden can put out. I know Hedman, of course, has a lot of name recognition, but I don't think he's that type of player now. I think Forsling is the best defenseman that Sweden can put out there, and I'm going to have him on the first pair, dang it. On the second pair, though, I have Hedman with Larson, and this to me, I think, is a pretty natural pairing. I don't want to see Hedman Erik Karlsson. If Sweden does that, then good luck on defense, because I don't think there's going to be much there. But I think Larson could really supplement the defensive shortcomings that Hedman has at this stage in his career and could allow Hedman to run and gun and play the offense that he desperately wants to play. On that third pair, though, I have Dahlin with Ekholm. Ekholm is a lefty, but I'm going to kind of make it a little more complicated here than maybe it needs to be. I want to see Ekholm in that lineup, though. I think he deserves to be there, but I also want to see Dahlin, so it was a tough position. Next up, we're going on to the last team here in Team Finland, who has a really interesting roster coming up. A lot of interesting decisions to make, because there's a lot of guys kind of on that borderline level on really both positions that is going to make this roster by the end very interesting. But for the forward group, this is how I see it actually going. The first line, I think, will be Mikael Granlund, who is extremely underrated at this point. Do not be surprised if he gets a top line spot, with Sebastian Aho and Mikko Rantanen. And on the second line, I got Ido Luostarinen with Alexander Barkov, of course, the Florida connection there. But I see Laine being on that right wing as the goal scorer. Hopefully he'll be healthy by then. I think he will be. We'll have to wait and see. If he's not, then maybe that changes things quite a bit. But I think I'm going to assume he's healthy for the sake of this video. And then the third line I see being Arturi Lehkonen with Rupe Hintz and Teravainen. This to me would just be a mess for other teams to deal with, especially defensively. I think Lehkonen and Teravainen, two guys that can work on the forecheck. Hintz is somebody that is underrated defensively, brings some great speed and some good intensity. I think that could be a really good third line. And then on the fourth, I see Erik Haula making this lineup. Great start to the season for New Jersey, but he's also a very versatile player, can play on the wing, can play at center, can bring some play all around. I also see Anton Lundell getting the fourth line spot, which you love to see. He's been a beast. And then Capo Caco as that fourth line right wing, with Matthias Michelli being the extra. I will ultimately have Michelli in my lineup. I think he's deserving of that, but I could see Michelli kind of being the odd man out. He's a very definitive playmaker, and I feel like Finland already has a lot of that in this lineup. Then we go into the defense, which honestly might be the weakest position out of any of these teams in any position at all. Heiskanen and Lundell were the only two confirmed defensemen. Outside of that, we have to make some predictions here. Ultimately, I think Heiskanen and Ristolainen is pretty locked in as the first pair. Ristolainen, I don't think is his great defenseman, but I think is about the best that Finland has on that right side, which is saying a lot. On that second pair, though, I see Lundell and Joki Harju being the pair, and then we got Mikala with Mata. Mata is a lefty, but I think Finland's just going to have to make a concession here. They don't have really many other right D options right now, and I think they're ultimately going to have a lefty on that right side, which leaves Välimäki as the extra defenseman. I think if this was made maybe a year ago, Välimäki would be in this lineup, but his poor start to the season, I think, puts him out of it. And then going on to the goaltending, which I think is also pretty locked in. You got Jussi Saros absolutely as a starter. After that, I think there's Lankinen, there's Luukkonen, there's a couple other options, but this is pretty similar to what I would have. I would have Luukkonen as the backup and Lankinen as the backup, but once again, we're splitting hairs. Now going on to what I would do for the Finland lineup, it does look a little bit different here. For my first line, I have Luostarinen with Barkov and Teravainen. This to me would just be so nasty in so many ways. But I think Luostarinen is somebody that I think you want to have a Barkov, but I want to have Barkov as my first line line center because he's one of the best centermen out there. I think we should use him as so, and that leaves on the second line Lehkonen, Aho, and Rantanen. The fact that you're able to have a player like Rantanen on your second line, I think, is a big weapon for Finland to use, and I think they will use it. And then the third line, you got Mikkel Granlund, Hintz, and Laine. I think you have two guys in Granlund and Hintz that can work, and especially playmaking wise, really bring a lot to Laine, especially, who I think could be in a sheltered role in that third line. And then on the fourth, I got Maccelli, Lundell, and Kakko. Yes, this is a complete kids line, and it's probably not very realistic to actually see, but it's my lineup, dang it. And I think Maccelli would be so fun with those two. And I think especially in Lundell and Kakko's case, they bring such good defense on the fourth line that I think you want to have those duo together. And then I have Halla as the ultimate utility guy who, in case of an injury, could play in really any position possible. Next, I'm going on to the defense, and I try my best. I mean, Heiskanen and Ristolainen, I think, is going to stay. I have Lindell with Mata and Mikalo with Jokiharju, with Välimäki being the extra D. It's tough, man, because it's like, I don't really trust Jokiharju with a second pair spot. I guess I trust Mata slightly more, but it's really not by that much. Finland's defense after Heiskanen, Ristolainen, Lindell, even Mikala, just completely falls off for me, so I try to do the best I could. And then finally, I have Saros, Luukkonen, and Lankinen as the goaltenders. But those are my predictions and what I would do if I was in charge of all of these four teams for the Four Nations tournament. I hope you guys did enjoy, and also for the future, once these rosters are actually revealed and once we get closer to the tournament, I'll make my predictions for each team and how I see them doing in the tournament, who I see ultimately winning, of course, and getting number one, and how I see it all working out from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So watch out for that, of course, in the future. If you are excited for that and want to see more hockey content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and comment down below your thoughts on my predictions. What do you agree, what do you disagree with, and what would your lineups look like? Let me know your thoughts down below, and of course, share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click on this card for all my hockey prospect talking one playlist, and of course, sign up to BetUS today, and thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video as well, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.